Well, hi, Ivis.
Oh, hi, Rolf.
So we're here to talk about these interviews that our students will be watching, and hopefully all our students will have a chance to watch at least one. And they're all really interesting, and I'd encourage you to take a look at all of them if you have a chance to, and certainly to talk about them with other folks in your class.
They're very interesting, but also they're like from different kinds of organizations. So, which I think that will allow us to compare, like how is it that they do things. So we have three organizations that were involved with advocacy, and that's like YIMBY Law. That's like the conversation that we have with Trust. And then Open Communities Alliance, and that is like the conversation we had with Vox. And the National Low Income Housing Coalition, which they operate at the national level, and that's the conversation with Sadian. And then we have like two cities, but they're like very different cities. One is the city of Chicago, which is a Rust Belt city, and there we talked to Ms. Novara, and then Salt Lake City, which is like a growing city, and there we talked with Price. So again, these like different conversations are with advocacy organizations and also cities. So here we want to distinguish first, like what is the blueprint? And by the blueprint, we mean it's like the big vision of how what zoning can do for cities, for regions, and even at the state, national scale. And also, we want to understand how they accomplish this like blueprint, which is the vision. And here we are talking about the playbook, which is like the tools that planners can use in order to advance equity. So then we want to get started with this idea of the blueprint and the vision.
Yeah, so we had a bunch of different versions or ideas about what the blueprint ought to be from different people across the country. And I noticed a couple of things that came up a few times. Um, so, and these are maybe all like elements of the blueprint. So it's more like the windows and the doors and the roofs and the so on, if we're going to continue the metaphor and make it a building. Um, but several people talked about accessory dwelling units or ADUs. Um, and um, and so I think I remember hearing about that from um, Marisa Navarra at the city of Chicago, as well as Angela Price. Um, I think those were the two. Do you remember any others, Evis?
Um, no, these are the two that talked about like smaller units as a way to increasing affordability and therefore furthering just having affordable housing.
Right. And obviously with neither of those are you necessarily going to get deep affordability, and you're not necessarily going to get a lot of opportunities for African Americans to live in predominantly white neighborhoods. Um, but it's an important element of increasing supply and choice because at least two things, and I think Marisa talked about this. If you're a homeowner who lives in a low income neighborhood, um, or if you're an aspiring homeowner there, having a second unit in your house will give you extra income so that you can afford to pay your mortgage. So that's, an important mechanism to allow those neighborhoods to be more diverse. That is, to have both renters and homeowners there. And then, of course, in the upper income neighborhoods, it's a way to introduce rental housing into neighborhoods that are really predominantly homeowners. And in the United States, over 70% of white families own their own houses, whereas it's closer to 40 or 45% of Black families, and only about half of Latino families. So that's that, thinking about how rental housing plays a role and how accessory dwellings can play a role in that, both in encouraging homeownership among households who don't have access to it, um, and allowing renters to live in mostly homeowner neighborhoods, which are often those that have a high level of opportunity. Um, I think that's one of the reasons why people do like them as a strategy, of zoning for equity. One of the pieces of the blueprint. Are there any elements, or elements of that house, the figurative, house in the blueprint, that you thought were interesting or important to point out, Evis?
Well, when thinking about accessory dwelling units, I think that the idea is like we should produce more affordable housing, right? And by like empowering like owners and having this provide us also an opportunity, as you said, for renting and so on. But what I found like interesting here was that in like both of the cities that this was like implemented, they are currently in like pilot programs, which this speaks about the idea of like how this is getting done. So it doesn't happen all at once in where it's approved in all neighborhoods. And I think that one of the reasons for that is because there might be opposition to this program. So this is a way of like evaluating if like something is like working or not. And something that I found interesting about Novara was that she talked about how they chose neighborhoods that were in high income areas and also like low income areas in order to think about equity, and how in her city this is something that it was like very present, as supposed to choosing, let's say, all neighborhoods that for just have like outright being able to develop the accessory dwelling units, as opposed to going through the conditional use permits. As in other cities, this again might be a lot of worry that there's a lot of renters coming into an area, or that areas that are like low income, especially with like Latinos or African Americans might live, that this might lead to actually lowering the quality of housing. So that was a way for her to think about equity, but also again to go back to this idea of having a pilot program, is that sometimes we want to do something for a whole city because we think it is good, but because of the politics and because trying something in your own city, you have to do it in baby steps.
Right, and that theme of baby steps comes through really in so often, and we'll come back to that, I think, in this recap, with some other examples. But that's something that, as you look at each of these videos, um, really be thinking not only about the list of the things that people say they either want, or think would be great, which is kind of the bigger vision, but also the things that they're doing more concretely, like right now, which is what they feel like they can get done. You'll see there's often a big gap between those two. Um, and that gap exists because all these folks are in it for the long run. And, they know that we didn't build zoning for white supremacy in the United States overnight. It took a while to put this in place, and a lot of different layers of that are still there. And so it's going to take a long time to undo it, as well. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't start now, because it could have a really big impact. And to that point, I thought it was interesting that Sonia Traus of Yimby Law in San Francisco was kind of dismissive of accessory dwelling units, of ADUs, as a strategy. Um, and that's in part because she arrived on the scene there, and it's fun to read the book Golden Gates if you haven't, if you want some side reading that's actually well-told journalistic stories about her organization and about the fight for more housing generally in the Bay Area. Anyway, she arrived uh, after probably 20, 30 years of advocacy had already been done on accessory dwelling units in California, starting in the early 1980s, probably. And so that process of making ADUs in California, uh, something that feels, like yesterday's news, it is there because they've been working on it for a really long time. But it doesn't mean that wasn't a real struggle to get to the point where they are. And meanwhile, they're actually fighting for something that would seem super radical in a lot of places, which is and this is again part of her blueprint, um, allowing 6 to 8 unit buildings on 5,000 square foot lots. I think she might even have said you could do even a 20 unit building on a 5,000 square foot lot, which in a lot of the United States is a density that I'm not sure builders even know how to build it in a lot of the United States, because it takes a certain kind of expertise to build that kind of a building. And that's just, and that's like what they're fighting for now, not to mention her longer term vision or her big blueprint, which was, if I'm not incorrect, it's like, well, why should we have zoning at all? We should just let people build what they want to, and there's going to be differences between neighborhoods because there's different tastes. But really, let's just let people build what they want to wherever they want to. And that, in a way, that really that was a pretty stark difference, I think, between Sonia Tross of Yimby Law and really all four of the other interviews.
Yeah, and I think that there's something about the speed of the production of housing that might matter here. So, for instance, just thinking about price in Salt Lake City, doing this evaluation of like ADUs, the amount of like housing that is produced is very, very small. And I think that Strauss' idea of like, well, let's zone for multifamily and adding a lot of density and do it even for market rate housing and at times even luxury housing. It will produce in the end like less of a demand of like lower places that have lower rents or that are more affordable, and therefore that will produce more equity for everyone. So I think that that's like again a little bit of like a market oriented approach, and but at the same time is trying to think about just like speeding up the process in a way.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's something that's really very central to Sonia Tross's argument. She comes out of the economics tradition. She has a master's in economics, and she argues, I think, with some justification, that in a situation where you don't have as much housing as people want, um, rich people with the resources to do so will buy the housing that they want in the places where they want, and ultimately at the bottom level, people end up homeless. And so her point, and something that she points out that those of you who look at her interview might notice, she points to a study that we'll link to in the notes to this session, um, that demonstrates how much how much lower cost housing is made available as high cost housing is being built in high cost neighborhoods. So that argument is called filtering, the idea that we get affordable housing in the United States by providing housing for the rich. And the rich who aren't happy with where they already live get to move into those housing units. They leave a vacancy behind, and that vacancy gets filled by somebody, and so on down the line. And because we as a country don't devote enough money to affordable housing, that's pretty much, as in terms of subsidy, right? That's pretty much how the US has always dealt with its need for enough housing, and for housing that's available at a price that people can afford, even if it's terrible quality housing, and they're paying more than their income. So that's sort of an acceptance, I would think, of that level of the status quo that Sonia Truss didn't get at, the idea that really the market can do a lot of this. And I'm not really sure that she'd make the argument that the market could do all of it by itself, but that's her serious focus, and those are the constituencies that she's representing.
Yeah, and I think that again, part of her argument is like allowing for growth, for there's equity for all. And I think that in some of the cities that we looked at, like in Salt Lake City, like growth is like happening quickly. So there's a lot of like provisions that the city or programs that the city is trying to implement to be able to accommodate for that growth without displacements. And then we see like in the city of Chicago that like growth is happening in like wider neighborhoods that are also gentrifying, or even Latino neighborhoods, right? That are dense. That then there's like more of an interest in these neighborhoods. So the city is like addressing like how to maintain the housing that is affordable, or naturally affordable housing already there, and at the same time allowing for growth. But I also wanted to talk about like some of the interviews that were a little bit more regional and national. So with Boggs, like who concentrating on more like a regional planning, so accommodating for also like growth at a regional scale, and thinking particularly about like fair housing and opening these like suburban communities. It was like very important for her. So I was wondering, Rolf, if you can talk more about fair housing and how this relates to our conversation about zoning.
Right. Yeah, so that's a good question that maybe some of the students know about already, but maybe not. There's a term that's called affirmatively furthering fair housing that comes up in several of these interviews. And that's a really important one. It's been important over the last, 8 years, especially, and it's likely to be important again. It goes back to the Fair Housing Act of 1968, which was passed immediately following the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in Memphis in 1968. It was widely recognized, and Dr. King fought to address that suburbs were mostly white, and that central cities were becoming more and more the neglected areas where Black and Latino people lived, and that there were really no opportunities for them to live in the white neighborhoods and cities that had more of the resources and were better places to raise kids. At least that was the thinking then, and it probably still is now. And there were two parts of the Fair Housing Act. One of the parts was really about what private sector actors do to keep people out of the developments that they have. So those are landlords, those are real estate agents, those are mortgage brokers, And so the Fair Housing Act made it illegal to discriminate on the basis of race and some other classes. And that's been amended since then to have to do with family of origin, with religion, with sex. So there are a lot of other classes that are so-called protected classes, and you can and should look those up. But there's a second part of the Fair Housing Act that's never really been fully implemented in the United States, and that's known as affirmatively furthering fair housing. So that's about how we promote more integrated communities in the United States, and also how we promote greater access to opportunity in the United States. At first, really, I think in the early 70s, that was really all about opening up opportunities in these rich suburbs like they do at the Open Communities Alliance, which Aaron Boggs works in. That's their real focus, is on providing opportunities for low-income people who are Black and Latino, really all kinds of low-income people, but in particular Black and Latino families, to move to the neighborhoods that have the best resourced school systems in the state, that have the cleanest air, that have the most parks, that have the lowest crime rates, that don't have lead in their homes, in their pipes. So problem after problem that's concentrated in the big cities like Bridgeport and New Haven and Hartford and some smaller cities too. The people who live there, and she talks about this, in some neighborhoods, 60% of the housing stock in those neighborhoods is subsidized by HUD. And that's not a great accomplishment, because that means that in a lot of the other parts of the state, there are no subsidized housing opportunities. And so that's, thinking about the role of that law, affirmatively furthering fair housing, which has been deeply contested, is both part of what you might call the playbook, but also could be part of a blueprint. Because once you say we're going to follow that law, you have to make up a set of actions or policies or strategies that you will adopt and carry out, so that you bring opportunity to those neighborhoods that are low income and disinvested, and likewise to open more opportunities for people in those high opportunity, so-called high opportunity suburbs. And so their alliance, the Open Communities Alliance, is one of a number of groups that have been fighting for more equitable land uses in Connecticut. Their main focus has been on opening up the suburbs, much more so. And she talks about this in her interview. You may see, those of you who watched that one, it's really much more on that than on making those really disinvested neighborhoods nicer places to live for the people who do live there. So that's, I think, Open Communities Alliance, it's an interesting organization, and maybe we'll talk in a minute about the playbook elements of what they're doing. But I want to kind of circle back to the idea of the blueprint and the playbook, because when we were talking about ADUs, we were talking about both. The ADU is the blueprint. The playbook is how do we get permission, or how do we make it more logical and common for ADUs to get built? The last thing that you'll be working on in this class, everybody will be working on projects that involve both coming up with your vision and coming up with a playbook. How are you going to get it done in the state or city or community where you and your classmates will be working this semester? So that's, I think, an important thing. So like, in order to get the affirmatively furthering fair housing really to be effective, it's not just a question of writing the right language and coming up with a good model. It's about a political fight that gets it done. Just like you start with pilots with ADUs, you have to have a long-term idea about how you're going to get it done. The other sort of larger scale organization uh, whose representative we talked to was the National Low Income Housing Coalition with Sarah Sadian. Ivis, you have some thoughts about Sarah and about that kind of combination of the blueprint and the playbook there that you might really
Yeah.
pull out.
So obviously they're working at the federal level, and so they're looking at this like very large scale and looking at like what is like possible. So in terms of like the local issues and the state issues, they might have some collaboration there as well, but they understand that having like this large scale or like planning this large scale it needs like this like bipartisan support, especially for doing two things that they're concentrated on. So one of them is like creating affordable housing, and for them it's like for people that are like very low income majority renters, but also to be able to like box have like housing that is interested in providing opportunity for all in areas of opportunity. So thinking about that like larger scale, and also just like again thinking about like how we collaborate. So I think that that's like very important for them, and they work as I said with people that are in the Republican Party, in the Democrat Party, and they try to look at like what those people might be interested in. So going back to this idea of like affirmatively furthering fair housing, the people in the Republican Party might be interested in thinking about allowing more developments in this of multifamily in more like suburban areas, while other like tenant groups might be like interested in having again more renting in those like areas of opportunity. So they build coalitions that might be with like developers, tenants, and advocates, and many others to be able to change legislation. And one of their big initiatives is a housing trust fund, and they're looking into again funding this program, but they also work in many other programs that are for renters, like the housing choice voucher, thinking about public housing. But one of the most interesting things is like how they do it, right? So which is like this idea of collaboration. And I think that this was a big theme as you like talked about, Rolf, thinking about the politics of like how we make this blueprint and also like playbook even possible. And something that you also talked about that was very important, Rolf, is that maybe at the city level you want to do something, but you can't because it's illegal at the state level, and that could happen with like accessory dwelling units. It's also happened with like rent control, like it's in the example in Illinois. So again, like as a planner, you need to be thinking at these like different scales and how you make the um, playbook possible, right? Because you might have this blueprint and you might think, I want to do X, Y, and Z. And then when you check your state legislation, you are like, oh yeah, I cannot actually, I'm not able to do this. So politics and the idea of collaboration is like very, very important.
Right, and then the idea of scale is really important too, right? We saw, just underscoring this again, we have two people who work in city government. One person who works at the Bay Area region level, who's now moving up to the California state scale and in YIMBY law, and one organization that's really working statewide in Connecticut. Um, and in all of those cases, we see examples in each of them, and maybe you can look for them, uh, of uh, of instances where a change in state law is necessary in order to take away the opportunity to exclude. And usually that's what's going on. That is that the state legislature is being asked or has been asked and has agreed to take away certain aspects of local control so that more equity can result at the local level. Because not every city is Salt Lake City. Salt Lake City is remarkable. And in Angela Price's interview, she talks about this, and she just leapt right into all of the great things that they're doing. They've got 11 policies for equity. There's parking reductions, an affordable housing overlay, some incentives, mitigation against gentrification. They're like one thing after another. Those are examples of the pieces of a blueprint that were so natural to her to be moving forward that I was just shocked. It's like, well, how did you get permission to do all of these things? And her answer was, well, we just have a culture here of collaboration. I'm not sure if she used the word culture, that
Mhm.
we have a long-standing habit of working collectively to solve the problems we agree on together. Um, I can't underscore enough how unusual that is, and how precious it is if you find yourself in a situation in a city or a state where you have that kind of consensus. You can do a lot in a short period of time because you don't have the opposition. So you can actually dream a bit bigger. And I think her dreams are certainly quite a lot bigger than Marisa Navarra, who recognizes the limitations imposed first by the city's politics, but then by the culture and the laws of the whole state. So I think that's an important thing. And I think on the other hand, both of them showed us or sort of conveyed that it's really important not to give up, um, not to say, well, we tried that 10 years ago and it didn't work, as if like the first time you're ever going to get it right or get permission to do it. If it's a fight worth having, you're not going to get it the first time. You have to figure out how to do it again. And I think, both of them, but especially Marisa Navarra, but also really the ones that come to mind mostly are Aaron Boggs and Sonia Tross. They know that this is a long game, and that in order to get uh, the blueprint you want for the place where you're working, you have to change the rules that you're being forced to play with, make up essentially your strategy, your playbook, to change the rules that keep you from being able to build the blueprint you want. I know we're kind of beating this metaphor a lot, but at this point in the semester, when you're still not sure, like, what am I getting into this semester? Um, I think both of us are really interested in clarifying those terms and strengthening them in your minds, so that the point here is not just to come up with a wonderful missing middle housing strategy, for example, without asking, like, how are we going to get the votes in place so that the city actually does this thing? Um, and maybe you can't. So where are you going to start instead? Or maybe that's too timid for your location. So what can we do instead? And how can we like honor and build on the context that's been set up for us by previous rounds of activism and equity-minded planners?
Yeah, and I think that again, every one of these organizations have a big vision of like how they achieve equity in their locations and nationally. And they have like a set of tools, right? So we have the blueprint, which is the vision, and then the playbook, which is the set of tools like of how we make this happen, right? And some places might have more tools than others, right? and maybe they're allowed to use more tools than other places as well. But in a way, all of them also have like some barriers as well to be able to achieve that blueprint. And as an example here, like in Salt Lake City, since you bring up that this is one of the places that it has a lot of tools and they're allowed to use a lot of tools. But there's like a particular example I could think of, like, for example, Salt Lake City doesn't have inclusionary zoning. And part of this is that they also talked a lot with the developers, right? And they try to use like incentives instead, like, for example, just like fast tracking development processes in transit station areas as opposed to having inclusionary zoning. So in a way, all of them are little by little seeing what is like possible. So I don't know if like a good way to like end this conversation is thinking of what is the gap that you see, Rolf, between like we have this like blueprint and we have this like playbook, and basically how we can get to what is our final vision as planner, knowing that we have like a long-term game, but still we have all these like barriers as well.
Yeah, I think, I do talk in metaphors a lot and it doesn't work for everybody, but, I would still say that the blueprint, contains the overall vision, but maybe it should instead be, a blueprint is a pretty detailed drawing. So, maybe the long-term vision is something that's more like the general conceptual site, the site diagram, where you have all the trees sketched in, you have the birds, you have the happy family in the front, you've got the, whatever kind of flags you picture on the, on the hanging from the banisters. You have the front porch or the stoop or whatever it is that you envision. But you know that the people who come after you to build that thing out are the ones who are going to be really elaborating on it. And right now, you've got a foundation to pour, and you have the basic structure that you've got to put up. But you do know that you can do that, or maybe you need to get permission to even get started on the work. And that's really the playbook that most of these people are working with is, let's say, short to medium term. But a lot of them have, a longer term strategy because they realize, like, I said a few minutes ago, you have to work on these things over time, and you have to honor the work that's been done in the past and recognize that we're already in a different place now than we were 10 years ago, and a different place than we were 10 years before that. It seems, in the human scale, like, will change ever come? But there is change coming to a lot of communities. And what we're hoping with this class is that you are an agent of that change in the places where you're working, as you're engaging with each other and with planning professionals in your location. I'm really looking forward to seeing what you all come up with this semester, and to visiting with you on occasion between now and the end of the year, and hopefully after that. Ivis, you have any last thoughts?
Well, I was gonna like just say to all the students, just like again, pay attention to these interviews. They're like great individuals creating change, and also they have very good advice for you, because you will also be working in your community creating change. So again, we are very glad that you're taking this class, and this is a critical moment in time to think about how to zone for equity.
Thanks.
Bye.